Hey there. I checked the microphone. I want to make sure it's working.
Good morning, and it looks good and everything's clear.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure.
Good morning. I'm Eric Blank, and this is the Commissioners' Weekly Meeting for September 20th, 2023. Commissioner Plant, any preliminary comments? Are you ready to vote to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Ready to go.
Is that a yes vote?
That's a yes vote.
All right. Commissioner Gilman?
I vote to approve the consent agenda.
As do I. Proceeding number 23AL-0428TR, Mr. Gramlich, Telluride outside.
Yes, good morning. I'm Gary Gramick of the transportation staff. This is an advice letter and tariff is filed by Telluride Flash Fishing Company. The DBA of Telluride Outside and Telluride Angler was filed on August 22nd to be effective on September 25th. Telluride Outside, under its certificate, transports passengers in sightseeing service between all points within a 40-mile radius of an intersection in Telluride. And they've owned and operated their certificate since July of 2004, so a significant period of time. Their annual report for 2022 showed their sightseeing revenue is about $392,000, with expenses of about $262,000. In this filing, they're proposing to change the length of time and the location of some of the tours, and really this was filed just to update the tariff. The fares and times and things were included in the info sheet. The manager of Telluride Outside submitted two statements to support the filing, one in August 24th and the other on September 7th. In the first one, he states that they are a guide service that operates in the Telluride area under special use permits from the U.S. Forest Service to provide these tours to various passes and mountain areas in the vicinity. They operate 5 Chevrolet and Ford pickups that have been converted with new suspensions, and also what they call the safari style passenger areas, which are there's no sidewalls and no top, so everyone has a better view. They total employees year round is about 40. For the drivers, they employ about 10 to provide these tours, obviously most of which are from May to November, before the snow becomes prohibitively deep. And they transport 3,000 to 4,000 passengers per year. He states their costs have increased dramatically in the last few years, as their rent on their office in Telluride, wages, the usual, fuel, and the cost of converting the vehicles has gone from $25,000 to $50,000 per vehicle. If you recall, I had several of these types of tariffs on the agenda a few months back, where I contacted all the carriers who haven't filed or updated their tariffs in several years. And in this case, the Telluride was one of those, and the manager states the purpose of the information submitted on September 7th was to explain that the company has failed to submit notices regarding rate changes due to the fact that they were unaware of that particular requirement, and they certainly wish to comply, and they want to complete any remaining requirements as soon as possible, and to complete this tariff. The tariff on file for Telluride Outside was filed back in May of 2013. I contacted the manager just on August 14th of this year, and the tariff was filed by August 22nd. So it was very responsive in submitting that. And some of the by our statutes and rules, a carrier may provide sightseeing service to these locations, and the charges may be per passenger or per group, and they may be on unpaved roads. But if they register as the limited regulation off-road charter, the rates have to be at a charter service. They can't go to commercial locations, but the rates aren't regulated as a limited regulation carrier. So it's might be somewhat confusing. And just this past week, the owner stated that they were going to file and register as an off-road charter service, and that was submitted, I believe, just 2 days ago. So they can now, once that's issued, could do either one, charter or the sightseeing, and the rates are regulated for one and not for the other. So I think that's probably more information you need, but I do have a recommendation unless you'd like any more info or have any questions.
Nope. If you could give your recommendation, that'd be great.
Yes, it would be to allow that tariff changes proposed, and we're glad to have it up to date, to allow it to become effective by operational law on the proposed date, which is September 25th.
Commissioner Plant. Well, you're muted somehow.
Yeah, my phone's going wonky. I support the recommendation.
You're back. Commissioner Gilman.
I also agree with the recommendation.
As do I, and we can do that by operational law. Thank you, Mr. Gramlich.
Mhm.
Proceeding number 23M-0007T, Ms. Buys, Ms. Dundas, telecommunication services.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Holly Bice with the Telecom Program Section. On January 3rd, 2023, the Commission opened proceeding 23M-007T for those subject to the Commission rules regulating telecom services and providers of telecom services to file their annual report and their DR 525. Rule 2006A provides that carriers required by the Department of Revenue to file the DR 525 pursuant to CRS 42-111 must file the same with the Commission on or before May 15th of each year. In early August, approximately 41 carriers had failed to submit the required DR 525 form to the Commission, or information that they did submit was not complete. The Commission issued decision C23-0527-I on August 8th, 2023, which ordered those 41 entities identified as delinquent to file the required DR 525 or provide an explanation of to why they were not required to do so no later than 14 days from the August 8th date. The delinquent entities have been reduced from 41 to 28, either due to compliance by the entity to file the necessary forms or by determination by Commission staff that certain entities that were on the original list are no longer identified as active or operating in Colorado. So with that, I will pause for any questions or make a recommendation.
If you can make a recommendation, that'd be great.
Sure. Commissioners advisors recommend that the Commission order staff to consider proceeding with a show cause or other appropriate proceeding for the 28 delinquent filers.
Commissioner Plant. Well, you're back. You're back muted. I can't hear you.
All right, how about now?
No, we can.
Support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman.
I also agree with the recommendation.
As do I, and that can be ABC order requiring staff to proceed with a show cause or other proceeding to address the carriers not in compliance. Thank you, Ms. Baez.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 23M-0253T, Mr. Enright, Ms. Ray.
Morning. Glad to agree with your intelligence by Mr. Jerry Enright. Docket number 23M-0253 is a repository docket opened on May 24th, 2023, with decision C23-0339 to determine whether eligible telecommunication carriers, or ETCs, have met the requirement for Commission certification pursuant to Code 47 of the federal regulations, with some additional Colorado-specific requirements. These ETC carriers should be certified to the Federal Communications Commission and the Universal Service Administrative Company by the PUC to continue to receive federal universal service funding and support. States must certify ETC designations to the FCC and USAC by October 2nd of 2023. This certification is accomplished with a letter from Commission Director to the Secretary of the FCC and the Administrator of USAC. Absent this timely certification from the PUC, ETCs will not continue to receive support. Staff reviewed the reports filed by the ETCs in the proceeding to ensure that they met the requirements included in decision number C230339. The PUC in its order stated that a copy of the Form 481 filed with the FCC shall also be filed with the PUC and would satisfy the requirements of Rule 2187G, along with the amount of federal universal service funding received through June of 2023, an affidavit attesting to the fact that the information provided is true and correct, documentation the carrier offers and advertises the rate and availability of basic universal service, Lifeline, and link-up programs through Colorado, that the carrier has been designated an ETC status. Certification that the ETC is able to function in emergency situations, a certification that the ETC is complying with applicable service quality standards and consumer protection rules. Staff has also reviewed company-specific financial information from some of the ETCs from their 2022 annual report filed with the PUC, such as general support expenses, operating expenses, network operations, and corporate operating expenses, as well as universal service support received by the ETC were appropriately used in 2022 and will be used through 2024 to support services such as investments and maintenances. The Commission in recent years granted ETC status to a group of winning bidders for funding in the FCC's RDOF program. Most of these providers are part of the certification cycle as they've begun to receive federal funding. Now I can pause for any questions or move to staff's recommendation.
Now, if you can go to your recommendation, that'd be great.
Staff recommends that the Commission approve the letter to be sent under the Director's signature to the FCC and USAC to certify all of the listed rural and non-rural exchange carriers and Lifeline only ETCs to continue to receive federal universal service support.
Commissioner Plant, shall we vote to continue federal support into Colorado? Oh, you're disappearing again. I will take a thumbs up as a yes. Commissioner Gilman.
Yes, I agree as well.
As do I, and that can be approval for the letter to go out over the director's signature. So thank you, Ms. Ray. Proceeding number 23M-0385T, Mr. Branson, Ms. Rosati, 911 charges. Ms. Kirkland.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm actually going to have Jennifer Kirkland, our 911 Program Manager, present this item, and we do have Wendy Rosati on as well to discuss the intervention item.
Thank you. Ms. Kirkland.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Jennifer Kirkland with Commission Advisory Staff and Wendy Rosati with Commission Counsel. On July 28th, 2023, the Commission issued a decision initiating this proceeding to set certain surcharge rates and a threshold rate, as well as distribution percentages for 911 funds to meet the statutory deadline of October 1st, as found in Title 29, Article 11 of Colorado Revised Statute. The decision contained initial recommendations from Commission staff regarding the setting of the surcharge rates and other actions that the statute requires that the Commission take by the October 1st deadline. Specifically, Commission staff recommended establishing the following items to take effect on January 1, 2024. A threshold amount for local emergency telephone charge rates of $2.05 per 911 access connection per month. Emergency telephone charge rates above the threshold require an application to be filed with and approved by the Commission prior to taking effect. 2 is a state 911 surcharge rate of 9 cents per 911 access connection per month. 3 is a prepaid wireless 911 charge of $1.88 per transaction. And 4 is percentages for the distribution of both the state 911 surcharge and the prepaid wireless 911 charge, following the methodology required in the statute. The reasoning for the recommendations provided in the initial order was also provided. Interested parties were encouraged to submit comments by August 20th, 2023, while the deadline for filing for intervention was August 18th of 2023. The initial order set a deadline for responsive comments of September 1st, 2023. I will now turn this over to Wendy to discuss the motions for intervention.
Ms. Rosati.
Good morning, Commissioners. On August 18th, 2023, Quest Corporation, operating under the business name Lumen, filed a motion to intervene. Lumen states that it is Colorado's only active basic emergency service provider and therefore has an interest in the establishment of the 911 surcharge rate. Under Commission Rule 1401C, persons seeking permissive intervention must demonstrate that the proceeding may substantially affect the pecuniary or tangible interest of the movement and that their interest would not otherwise be adequately represented. I recommend finding that Lumen does have a pecuniary or tangible interest that would not otherwise be adequately represented and granting their request for intervention.
Anything else, Ms. Kirkland, Ms. Rosati? Nope. Commissioner Plant?
All right, trying again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Goman?
I also agree with your recommendation, Mr. Rosati.
As do I, and that can be an ABC decision granting intervention.
Sorry, thank you. I believe that Ms. Kirkland has additional recommendations to provide.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioners. We had comments filed by the only intervening party, and the comments were supportive of the rates as proposed. There are no tariff increases currently under consideration by the Commission. The intervening party anticipates filing a tariff amendment in 2024, but does not anticipate the changes which may result from an amendment approval to occur early enough in the year to impact the surcharge rate's ability to effectively reimburse governing authorities for any approved increase. Based on projections prepared by staff, the proposed 9-cent surcharge rate would be sufficient to reimburse monthly recurring charges for the governing bodies if the tariff costs remain at their current rate. For these reasons, I recommend granting the motion for intervention and adopting the rates and distribution percentages as follows. An ETC threshold rate of $2.05 per 911 access connection per month, a state 911 surcharge rate of 9 cents per 911 access connection per month, a prepaid wireless 911 charge rate of $1.88 per transaction, a distribution schedule for the state 911 surcharge consistent with the attachment provided in the opening decision of the proceeding, and a distribution schedule for the prepaid wireless 911 charge consistent with the attachment provided in the opening decision of the proceeding. And I will turn it over to you for any questions that you may have or your decision.
Commissioner Plant?
I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman?
Thanks, Ms. Kirkland. I also support the recommendation.
As do I, and now it can be an ABC decision, not only granting the intervention, but also setting rates and distribution percentages for 2024. Timing's everything. Anything else, Mr. Branson, Ms. Kirkland?
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you. Proceeding number 23A-0392EG, the Clean Heat Plan, and the motion for summary judgment procedural schedule. Ms. Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. As you may recall, last week the Commission granted the intervention and established the parties to this proceeding. The Commission also affirmed that the deadline to respond to the motion for partial summary judgment filed on September 6th by SWEEP, NRDC, Sierra Club, COSACIA, WRA, CREST, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Boulder. We affirmed that deadline is September 20th, which is today. Yesterday, we received a joint motion for extension of time from the Colorado Decarbonization Coalition, the City of Pueblo, Pueblo County, Project Canary, and the Pipe Fitters Local 208 entity. And they seek to extend the time for responses until October 3rd, which is 14 days from the mail date of the decision from last week's CWM. As grounds for their motion, they state that the motion for summary judgment is long and complicated, and also that the commission's decision granting interventions and affirming the current deadlines for responses has not yet been issued. I note that it was issued yesterday. In response to the joint motion, several movements, including SWEEP, NRDC, Sierra Club, Cosacia, WRA, Crescent, PRCO, state that they are opposed to the joint motion because it would actually prejudice other parties and delay the proceeding. They state that the commission, that until the commission rules on summary judgment motion, the parties will be forced to spend time and resources on issues that the motion shows are outside the proper scope of the proceeding. They also assert that time is of the essence because the 2025 goal is looming and the motion parties do not provide an explanation for why additional time is actually needed. So I can pause here for a discussion or recommendation as to whether to grant an extension of the response time for the motion for summary judgment.
Why don't you make your recommendation and we'll come back with questions, comments, discussion, or a vote.
Thank you. Well, first, we recommend that the commission should waive remaining response time on its own motion. The motion was received yesterday, but obviously if we don't act on it today, the issue will be moot. But ultimately, it's your call to grant the full request of 14 days, a partial request, or deny outright, which would mean keeping the existing deadline of today. In my view, because the motion is opposed and because we also share concerns about the timeline of the proceeding, I'd recommend granting the motion in part and extending the deadline to no more than close of business on September 27th, or 7 days from a mail date of a decision today. We share the opposition to the motion's concern on the timeline and that the motion likely presents special issues. However, in the interest of hearing from as many parties as possible, it may make sense to grant some additional time, as the motion indicates that at least some of the movements are not prepared to file something today.
Commissioner Plant, what do you think about cutting the baby in half? Splitting the difference.
It's a little gory.
Yeah, sorry. Solomon.
I support to moving the deadline to next Wednesday. Is it next Wednesday? 27th.
Yep. Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, you should never cut a baby in half. But
I apologize.
I agree with
For
you.
the record,
Yeah.
For the record, the PUC is taking a strong position.
So I agree with you, Ms. Dundas. I can live with next Wednesday, the 27th. I mean, I could even move it up to Monday. I think some modest amount of additional time is okay, but have concerns about keeping this proceeding moving and keeping on a relatively the same timeline here. And this was a known issue, as you pointed out. It was filed on the 6th. So for me, Monday or Wednesday of next week would work. I don't know what I have against Tuesday, but no later than Wednesday certainly would be okay with me.
Yeah, I'm fine with the Wednesday and splitting the difference. So I think that can be an ABC decision, waiving response time, granting the motion in part, and extending the deadline to COB Wednesday, September 27th. So thank you, Ms. Dundas.
Thank you.
Mr. Davis, opening up an M docket on GCA potential reform.
Good morning, commissioners. I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. Senate Bill 23291 became effective on August 7th, thereby enacting Section 40-3-120. This new statute requires the 4 Colorado investor-owned gas utilities to file on or before November 1st a gas price risk management plan. And that plan will include proposals for leveling or reducing the volatility of fuel costs that are recovered pursuant to the utilities gas cost adjustment, or GCA, filings. The new statute also requires the Commission to adopt new or modified rules on or before January 1st of 2025, governing each gas utilities GCA and each investor-owned electric utilities rate adjustment mechanism that's used for fuel cost recovery. The statute requires that the rules be modified to align the financial incentives of the utilities with the interests of their customers. In adopting these new rules for the GCA and for the energy cost adjustment or electric commodity adjustment, which recovers the fuel costs for the electric utilities, Senate Bill 291 requires the Commission to consider the results from risk mitigation mechanisms, including symmetrically allocating the amount of fuel price risk to the utility, a range of outcomes within which no risk sharing occurs, and a cap on any incentive or cost share. The statute further requires the Commission to tailor the rules to apply to different utilities based on the utility size and corresponding impacts on customers' affordability. The matter is on today's weekly meeting agenda for the Commission to discuss whether it wants to open a proceeding to serve as a repository for comments or suggestions and proposals for modifications to the Commission's gas rules, specifically modifications to the GCA rules, and for the development of new rules in the Commission's electric rules to govern fuel cost recovery. This proceeding would be intended to inform the development of one or more notices of proposed rulemaking, or NOPRs, to implement 40-3-120. So advisors have prepared a draft order opening such a proceeding, and we've circulated it with you to assist in your discussion this morning. The order explains the relevant provisions in Senate Bill 291. It discusses utility bill increases that were experienced last winter as a context for the General Assembly's passage and Governor Polis's signing of Senate Bill 291. And for the purpose of stimulating discussion about new rules and ideas for the implementation of those provisions I described, the order presents an example of a risk mitigation mechanism, specifically the Energy Cost Recovery Clause implemented by Hawaiian Electric Company. The order contemplates the designation of a hearing commissioner and sets filing dates for comments and proposed additions and modifications to the Commission's rules. The draft order would set December 1st as the deadline for the initial comments, and responsive comments to those initial comments would be due January 19th. So I can answer any questions. Alex Rosen and Aaron O'Neill are available to answer any questions about the features of HECO's ECRC. I also think Chair Blank is very familiar with the mechanism. So I'll turn it over to you for your decision on whether to open a pre-rulemaking docket to prepare those future NOPRs for the GCA and the electric utilities ECA.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, and thank you, Ms. O'Neill and Ms. Rosen for framing this issue and exploring national best practice. And I just say consistent with our conversation from a couple weeks ago, where we appointed each of you as hearing commissioners in two separate M dockets. I'd be interested in serving as hearing commissioner in this one. I've been struggling with this issue of aligning utility and customer incentives ever since the Storm Uri event over 2.5 years ago. And, you know, it just seems like it might be best if we could structure a mechanism where the utility wins when customer win, and vice versa. And now there's a statutory basis for that position. So I'm really pleased to see our team find a potential path forward, at least as a basis for discussion with the parties that appears to have been successfly implemented elsewhere. So this will all come back to the full commission by the time there's proposed rules. But wanted to see where you guys are at. Commissioner Plant, thoughts, comments, discussions, vote, wherever you'd like to take it, sir.
Yeah, I realized I came in sort of at the tail end of the craziness last winter, and I know that you guys were sort of struggling with this issue all through the winter, and I know it's one that's important to the ratepayers here as well as the legislature. Obviously, they brought it up in the legislation last year, and Chair Blank, I really appreciate your leadership and you know, sort of spearheading the research on this and the work Alex did. So I don't, did you make a motion? Or
I guess the vote is to open an M docket and appoint me hearing commissioner. I think that's what's pending.
Great. I
Commissioner
support that.
Commissioner Gilman, comments, thoughts, discussion, vote, questions for Ms. O'Neill, Ms. Rosen, Ms. David, Mr. Davis?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. I don't know if there are questions just yet. I mean, first of all, I support you as hearing commissioner of this, in case I forget to say that. So go forth. And I certainly agree with the premise of essentially trying to align the utilities interests with customers' interests, give utilities some skin in the game and the fuel costs that are being passed through. And as we saw last winter, as we saw in Winter Storm Uri, are incredibly impactful to customers in terms of what they are actually paying for their utilities. So, you know, I know that the utilities kind of frequently say, well, we don't make a profit on this, it's just a pass through. But I think it's really important to recognize that this very directly impacts the affordability for customers. And so it has to be a top priority for us, whether or not the utilities are profiting on it. It is an essential piece of looking at how we keep energy affordable, especially natural gas, affordable for customers. You know, and I think some of the legislature's work to, you know, really have us look at reducing that volatility ideally will be helpful, provide this commission some new tools to work with the utilities to smooth some of that out. You know, but kind of the underlying basis here is this is an incredibly volatile commodity market, and we're just along for the ride in the commodity market, like that gets passed through. So to the extent we reduce volatility, those costs essentially get smoothed out or pushed out right into the future largely. Ideally, we can actually reduce some costs with some of these mechanisms, you know, but it's such a tough area, I find this, because it is inherently an incredibly volatile, unregulated commodity market that we're having to deal with. And so I just want to be realistic about what we control or can possibly have the utilities control and what we can't control. And you know, the fact that this commodity gets incredibly expensive right when everyone needs it the most, I think is essentially a feature, not a glitch, of the way that market is working. And you know, I don't know what else to say. I don't have a good conclusion of this, but like it's an incredibly frustrating, kind of sometimes devastating position to be in the interactions that we see with this market. You know, I certainly think and hope that the utilities can get more engaged here in having some skin in the game and having like an actual financial incentive to perhaps, you know, beat the market, use whatever tools they can use, and kind of exercise whatever power they can exercise to ideally make this turn out better for Colorado customers. But as we look at just natural gas as a whole, this is what we're dealing with, and it's incredibly difficult, I think, to really maintain affordability on a product, a commodity where the price is controlled far outside the state of Colorado. So it's frustrating to me, I think, as you can tell.
Well, just to set expectations about what's going to come out of this docket, I think this is only really to have the utilities have some skin in the game and align incentives. I think there's going to be a whole other set of proceedings on hedging and managing gas price volatility, and you know, and as you well know, clean heat plans, gas infrastructure planning, gas rate cases. So this will be one probably small but to me significant piece of the puzzle. And I guess I just asked Ms. O'Neill, is there anything you'd like to say about how this you know, GCA ECA reform you know, fits into, you know, gas price volatility mitigation and hedging strategies and storage and some of the other things you're working for? And Ms. Rosen, if you're out there, you might turn on your camera too.
Sure. So good morning, commissioners. I'm Erin O'Neill with your economics section. So I think I would echo much of what the chairman said. I think as I think about it, sort of the first provisions that Mr. Davis talked about in 291 regarding the risk mitigation plans that will be filed in November, those are sort of, in my view, primarily a customer focused provisions, you know, looking at the volatility that customers are experiencing and where to cap that and defer the cost into the future. And then the later provisions regarding the incentive mechanisms are where it's sort of the pressure or incentives for the utilities. And I think that's how this has been set up. And doesn't have to be exactly that those risk mitigation plans could, include hedging and storage and other provisions. But I think of those primarily as a customer experience. How do they experience volatility? And then the back end is how to align the incentives. And I think that's what this end docket is about, is looking at that piece, the performance incentive mechanisms, and how we put, align those interests with utilities and consumers so they're winning together and losing together. But I also agree, Commissioner Gillian, natural gas is a very volatile commodity. That's what we're trying to manage.
Commissioner Plan, any thoughts before I turn it back to
Yeah, no, I think this has been a good discussion. I mean, I think that, I think it's important for people to know that, like, the commission is taking on risk mitigation on a variety of different fronts, because, this is obviously an issue that really has hit customers very hard recently. And I think that we could look at, beneficial electrification as a larger, systemic way of addressing reliance on commodity fuels. I think, we can look at things like the gas demand response and the VPP stuff as ways in which we can reduce our reliance on commodity fuel generators. And I think that then we also, through this docket, are looking at how we can sort of smooth out, as Commissioner Gilman said, the cost impacts of fuels that we do rely on. And I think they're all different components of a much larger effort that we're engaged in to try and mitigate consumer risk. And so I think this is an important component. Did we lose the chairman? I take it all back.
We'll give him a minute. I don't see his name on here anymore. You've offended him.
We're going to take on internet service in Boulder County.
We'll give him just another minute. See if we can't find him real quickly. Please hold.
Hey, this is Eric. Sorry, my internet decided to shut down. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Sorry. All right, Commissioner Gilman, did you have other thoughts?
No, and I, like I said, I support this effort. It's important for us to be effectively what I consider an effective shock absorber in the system to, prevent these immediate price spikes from going through and shocking customers. And perhaps I was a little harsh, but I actually feel that way. Like, the problems here are systemic and are major in terms of the cost that customers can incur from this commodity. And it's, I increasingly struggle with how we deal with that in the long term. I agree with Commissioner Plant. There are probably some other, more systematic ways to try to reduce risk here, in addition to the different financial measures. But I think I just wanted to kind of be transparent to those watching, those participating, about probably the issues the commission can address and the issues that are beyond the commission in terms of how different things work outside of the state of Colorado. So that was my main point. Don't want to mislead people about the extensiveness of what what we can do, but we will certainly try everything we can do. And Chair, I think you've been dedicated to this and looking into it. So appreciate and support you leading the effort.
Well, likewise, appreciate your efforts to present a comprehensive, big picture perspective and try and focus on the linkages between the various proceedings and, try and come up with a comprehensive response to what's going on in gas markets. So I think with that, that can be an ABC decision. Mr. Davis, opening the docket and appointing a hearing commissioner. Anything else, Mr. Davis, Ms. O'Neill, Ms. Rosen?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Proceeding number 23M-0234G, Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Rosati, gas infrastructure plan.
Yes. Hello, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson of the Commission's advisory staff. I'm joined by Wendy Rosati of Commission Counsel. Public Service Company filed an informational gas infrastructure plan pursuant to new gas rules on May 18th. Docketed as 23M-0234G. Since then, the Commission has established parties, received the initial comments, held a technical conference, issued a question set via decision number C23-0566I, and received company responses to that decision. Reply comments are due October 2nd. The next step in the process is to establish public comment hearings. Advisors have communicated with the parties to hold the dates of October 19th and 20th and confirm that the company will have the appropriate personnel available for those dates. Advisors recommend setting those dates for the public comment hearing and posting such on our public calendar. Another component is the overall format. As part of the gas rulemaking, the Commission utilized a format that provided for public comment at the beginning and ending of daily sessions, and more in-depth conversation with the various parties along a range of issues in between. That format could work well for the instant proceeding. One nuance to the format setting is that the company claims that key data, particularly with respect to its projected overall capital expenditure, is confidential. This raises two issues regarding whether such information is appropriately labeled as confidential and how to conduct the public comment hearings accordingly. I'll pause here to allow for your discussion, to answer any questions, or to provide a recommendation.
And why don't you provide a recommendation, and then we'll come back with a discussion, comments, questions about.
Sure. Advisors recommend the Commission request that the parties, as part of their October 2nd reply comments, to remark on the labeling of company responses to Commission questions as confidential. This may allow the Commission to rule on the confidential labeling prior to the comment hearing, to the public comment hearings of October 19th and 20th, and proceed with the public comment hearings in an efficient manner.
Commissioner Plant.
So that ruling would happen at the October 4th CWM?
That could take place at the 4th or the following, the 11th.
I support the recommendation. Thanks.
Commissioner Gilman.
Thanks, Mr. Mendelson. Yeah, I support your recommendation. Ideally, we can take it up at the 4th so that we have enough lead time in the lead up to that public comment hearing for people to understand. And I think for context, these are specifically information presented on pages 9, 11, and 12 of that response, right, Mr. Mendelson?
That's right.
Yeah, and in some cases, those, like one of them is an exact reproduction of a table from the gas rate case 22 AL 0046G, which was not labeled confidential in that proceeding, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so just for clarity, what we're talking about, how we're talking about it. I mean, and I think it'll be essential to get some input from the parties about if this was appropriately labeled as confidential, because I think this necessarily will need to be a significant discussion at that public comment hearing, as we're really struggling to understand how we get a meaningful amount of expenditures represented in the GIP, which I think the general feeling from comments I've seen so far is we might have missed the mark with a very, very small percentage. of expected expenditures being represented. So this is clearly an important discussion point, and I think it will be important for us to really be able to analyze if this was appropriately marked or if it should not be confidential, so that it can be discussed more freely at that public comment hearing. So I think anything we can do to move the timeline along, and ideally review this at the 4th to make sure we have time for everyone to understand how this will be addressed at that public comment hearing would be helpful. So I'd appreciate the parties addressing that. And that's that original information in 22 AL 0046G was in Ms. Veach's direct testimony in there. So same data can be seen there as well. So certainly appreciate you bringing this up, and I think it's reasonable to have them all comment on it.
Yeah, and you might, just to echo what Commissioner Gilman said, we might ask the company to explain why that one exhibit is confidential here, but was not confidential in the gas case. So I think we're only going to have really one opportunity, or it'd be best if this was resolvable on October 4th. So you might have some language in the order asking the company to explain why something like that is deemed confidential here, but not elsewhere. So I think, Mr. Mendelson, that could be an ABC order scheduling the public comment hearing and some requests on confidentiality consistent with this discussion. Does that give you what you need?
It does. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilman, did you have something else on that?
I guess just as that comes up, Mr. Mendelson, do you think as we get closer to that public comment hearing, we'll want to have a discussion on how to most appropriately kind of plan it, like make an agenda or a plan? I know we had discussed a bit, should we follow kind of something like we did in the gas rules where we had certain allotments of time for certain types of subjects? Is that something we should bring up so that people know what to expect? I don't know that we're ready today, but is that something in the next, couple weeks we should think about and bring up so that people are a little more informed about what we're planning for the actual kind of schedule and run of events for that public comment hearing?
Yeah, let me jump into, I think, Mr. Mendelson, can we just frame that up for the October 4th agenda? It seems like it'd be good to hear from the parties on October 2nd, but before we try and structure that hearing. But go ahead, Mr. Mendelson.
Yeah, I was just going to agree that we can, once we get the reply comments, we'll have a little more information about people's interests and can possibly set an agenda at that time on the 4th or possibly the 11th as well.
Okay, perfect. I mean, to the extent it's all brand new and there's a lot of interest in a lot of areas, it seems like the more organized we can be about how to run that public comment hearing, the better, to ensure that we can actually get to each area and be thoughtful about how much time should be spent.
And I would just ask, in the gas rules, we set out and created panel discussions, but then there was also, I think, an opportunity to just ask all the parties that were participating broad questions. So do you think the commission would be interested in panels again?
I mean, I'm personally interested in setting it up with the panels, maybe utility, non-utility. I don't know if there's like an environmental customer one. Commissioner Gilman, any thoughts on how you'd break it up? I mean, should we solicit from the parties how they'd like to see it go, or you think maybe not? Commissioner Gilman?
I don't know. I'm trying to think about the applicability of like how we did it in the gas rules to this. Certainly, I think it might make sense to kind of carve out certain subjects for certain chunks of time, if you will. It'll be hard for people to probably not repeat, like the parties who are already in the proceeding, to not just repeat what their written comments have been, which will come in pretty short order before that. So I'd certainly not like to promote just a repetition of what we could have already seen in the written. So I would envision it being more topical, but more interactive perhaps, so that we can ask some questions about what they have submitted in comments. So I don't know the degree to which we want kind of direct testimony, if you will, about what they've already stated, but I do picture us more maybe carving it out by topic and having like an opportunity for an interactive session by topic area at kind of prescribed times throughout the day.
I'm hoping it may not take the full 2 days, but we'll see. All right, anything else, Mr. Mendelson? Does that give you what you need for your ABC order?
It does. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. C, proceeding number 23R-0408EG, triple R on the emergency rules. Mr. Davis, and I guess maybe Mr. Gomez, although he may have had computer problems. Nope, there you are, sir. All right.
Great. Again, I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. By decision number C230538 that was issued on August 14th, the Commission put in place temporary rules to implement certain rate filing related provisions in Senate Bill 291. Specifically, the temporary rules implement the provisions in 40-3102.5, requiring the filing of certain information with the utilities base rate tariff filing. The temporary rules also implement provision in 1025 requiring the filing of rate trend reports when an electric or gas utility seeks to increase a rate or charge. The temporary rules further implement the annual reporting requirement related to costs prohibited from utility rates, and the statutory provisions that the temporary rules are intended to enact became effective on August 7th. Public Service and Black Hills timely filed an application for rehearing, re-argument, or reconsideration to the decision adopting the temporary rules. And in their pleading, they explain that Atmos Energy Corporation also supports the changes to the temporary rules sought in the RRR pleading. The utilities at a high level raised 3 primary objections. First, the utilities object to the certification process for the completeness of a base rate tariff filing as set out in the temporary rules. They would instead like the temporary rules to implement a much less substantive check on whether the utility's initial rate case filing includes a cost of service study for a historic test year in executable format with work papers. And their proposed certification process would not involve any protests from ratepayers or reviews by staff or the UCA. And their certification process would also not have any impact on the 30-day window between the filing of the rate case and the effective date of the tariff sheets, or any impact on the 250-day statutory suspension period. Specifically, what they would like to see is an order from the Commission on the completeness of the filing to be issued around day 20 of that 30-day period, with the final 10 days being when the utility could remedy the filing if there was an absence of a cost of service study for a historic test year in executable format with the work papers. The second factor that the utilities object to has to do with the type of base rate tariff filings that would trigger the requirements for the Commission's determination of completeness. The utilities only want the temporary rules to apply to rate case filings where there is showing of a higher overall revenue requirement by the utility. So in other words, they don't want these temporary rules to apply the certification process when the base rate case entails other sorts of changes in the base rates, such as rate design, new allocations of base rate costs to customer classes, or changes in exemptions or variances from the normal application of base rates. And third, the utilities object to preparing rate trend reports for rates that apply to non-residential customers. They argue that most of their customers are residential customers and that the multitude of rates for the non-residential rate classes makes the rate trend reports burdensome and confusing. In all, the utilities seek more than 20 changes to the temporary rules, and in their RRR, the utilities explain the rationale for each of those changes, and they provided blue lines of the specific modifications they seek to change in the rule language. I don't think it's necessary for us to go through all 20 of those changes today, but I can present them if you wish. But before we move on, Mr. Gomez will present a motion for leave to reply to the utilities RRR that the Colorado Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate filed yesterday.
Mr. Gomez.
Yes, can you hear me?
We
Okay,
can.
great. Yeah, UCA filed this motion yesterday for a leave to respond to the joint application for RRR. Under Rule 1506B, no responses to an application for RRR may be filed except upon motion, and any motion for leave to file a response is required to demonstrate a material representation of a fact in the record, an incorrect statement of or error of law, an attempt to introduce facts not in evidence, accident or surprise, which ordinary prudence could not have guarded against, or newly discovered facts or issues material for the moving party, which that party could not with reasonable diligence have discovered prior to the time the application for RRR was filed. Here, UCA seeks to file a response in response to the utilities RRR filing, and zeroes in specifically on rules 3109 and 4109, which they say the utilities are attempting to limit the statutory requirement to provide rate trend reports for the previous 10 years only for residential customers. I would note that under Rule 1506B, while we certainly applaud UCA and appreciate them filing this motion for leave to respond to the RRR, I think under the circumstances and under the narrow issue that they want to address pursuant to 1506B, it's really the response is not necessary, as I think you will hear during Mr. Davis's discussion of the recommendations, and would not, I think, serve in this instance to assist the commission in its decision. So my recommendation would be to deny the motion as unnecessary at this time.
Well, before we take up the motion, Mr. Davis, do you want to provide your recommendation on the utilities substantive RRR requests?
Sure, I'd be happy to make that recommendation. It's clear that with these 20 changes and the arguments that are raised in the RRR filing, that the utilities object to several aspects of the temporary rules, but the arguments they raise in RRR, I think, are more appropriate for the commission to consider in the permanent rulemaking that will follow. Advisors and counsel recommend that the commission really summarily deny the RRR. Public Service and Black Hills failed to demonstrate how any of these temporary rules are impossible to implement or are unduly burdensome. And they make no compelling argument that the provisions that have been put forth and put in place on a temporary basis are contrary to the law or harmful to the public interest. And as a general principle, we think the commission should refrain from rendering substantial policy determinations when ruling on this RRR. It's not necessary in this particular situation, and all of this is really better left to the permanent rulemaking. Although we are recommending that the commission issue a decision denying the RRR and thereby preserving the temporary rules without modification, there is one thing that would merit some clarification. The utilities are concerned that some changes that are sought to a base rate tariff sheet will not actually affect the level of the base rate. And in those situations, we can see how the rule provisions, the temporary rule provisions regarding the requirement to file a cost of service study may not be necessary. However, changes in definitions, requirements, exclusions, variances, and terms and conditions in a base rate tariff sheet can really have an impact on how the base rate is implemented and thus affect customer bills, even when the level of the base rate doesn't change. So while cost of service information may not be necessary for the potential rate case that would be submitted through a base rate tariff filing, there may be other reasons why the commission may want to apply that certification process. So for this clarification, we recommend that the commission in its decision state that in the event the base rate tariff filing does not affect the level of the base rate, it's reasonable for the utility to seek a waiver from the cost of service study filing requirements, which are in subparagraphs F1, A through D, while the temporary rules are in effect. So summarily, deny the RRR, finding that the issues raised by the utilities are better addressed in the permanent rulemaking, but making that one clarification regarding the reasonableness of seeking a waiver from the cost of service study filing requirement.
Commissioner Plant.
I support the recommendation with the clarification.
Commissioner Goman.
I also agree with your recommendation, Mr. Davis.
As do I, and that could be an ABC decision summarily denying the application for RRR subject to the one clarification, and denying the UCA motion to file a response is, I guess, moot and maybe not needed. So Mr. Davis, Mr. Gomez, anything else on this one?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Thanks to both of you. Proceeding number 23V-0406 GPS. Ms. McLaughlin, Mr. Stilson.
Yes, good morning, commissioners. In this filing, Public Service requests a waiver of Rule 11,008B that incorporates by reference the federal standards for the transportation of natural gas, requiring odorization in certain circumstances. The request seeks to extend a waiver that was granted since 1989. Through decision number C89-766, issued in May of 1989 and amended in July of that same year, the Commission granted the initial waiver regarding this pipeline for the company's BF Goodrich large volume customer. As the 1989 waiver explains, at the time, the company proposed to install a dedicated unodorized natural gas pipeline for this particular customer in Pueblo, Colorado. Due to the specific uses of the natural gas at this facility, the gas must essentially be void of sulfur compounds. And as a result, the company represented that to odorize the natural gas for this 800 feet of pipeline and then attempt to remove the odorant would not be logical or economical. Since the initial state waiver was granted and following federal waivers were granted in 1989, the pipeline has remained unodorized since it was built. Through its August 2023 filing before you today, the company seeks the same waiver and provisions, noting current federal provisions continue to require natural odorant or for a gas distribution line to be odorized, and that the current Commission rule incorporates by reference these same federal standards. The company's filing includes the same requirements ultimately authorized in 1989, namely markers every 200 feet, written customer notice and recommendations for leak detection installation, and leak surveys at least twice per calendar year. In addition, the company includes the provision that it would increase leak survey frequency should regulatory requirements change. The company requests the waiver under these conditions be extended for 10 years. No party has intervened in this proceeding, and the company represents that it conferred with trial staff in preparation of the filing. Unless there are questions, I am prepared to make a recommendation on this item.
If you could go to your recommendation, that'd be great.
Certainly. So in this instance, advisors do agree that there is good cause to continue the requested waiver. However, 10 years is a significantly long time for any waiver granted by the commission. Both state and federal regulations are also likely or ongoing regarding leak detection in coming years. Therefore, and in addition to the marker, notice, and other contingencies already included in the requested waiver, we recommend that the order make clear that waiver is for the earlier of 5 years, or if there is a change in state or federal law regarding pertinent leak detection regulations. I'd also note that consistent with the 1989 waiver process, if commissioners agree with the recommendation today that a state waiver is appropriate, as it did in 1989, the company may seek concurrent federal waivers, and if there are any added contingencies, the commission's order can note that the company should make an appropriate filing here, seeking updates for consistencies, as it did with the initial waiver in 1989.
Commissioner Plant,
Thank you. I support the recommendation.
Commissioner Goman.
Thanks, Ms. McLaughlin. I agree with your recommendation. I do have one question. It might be for Mr. Stilson, not you, so sorry. So a lot's changed in terms of leak detection since 1989. So I'm just curious if, I don't know like the layout or anything, but would it be reasonable for them to deploy more advanced leak detection that continuously monitors, just given the significant safety risk of non-odorized gas, the potential of leaks, is it possible that new technology really allows them to deploy something that's continuous and therefore kind of much safer in terms of its monitoring?
I'm not sure if Mr. Stilson is on today, but I would say that that's at least from a perspective of process and legal perspective, part of why I think that our recommendation includes a shorter timeline and also an update if there are significant state or federal regulations that could include, for example, if there's technology updates that must be included, the company come back and provide an additional waiver so the commission could consider it with that additional information.
Yeah, that's reasonable. No, I think we're at the emergence of seeing the advanced leak detection become a lot more prevalent, although I would buy not, kind of everywhere at this point in time, but I would certainly expect if they come back for another waiver that they incorporate the latest and greatest technology to actually provide continuous monitoring for safety at the facility as is possible and appropriate. So just want to acknowledge the technological advances that could really make this safer at this point in time. And, and there's always a chance that I think that they deploy that on their own. And I certainly hope that they would consider doing so to improve the safety of the facility.
Just want to clarify in case I missed it, that's a vote in favor of the recommendation, Commissioner Goman.
Yeah, but a strong push toward the best we can deploy technology and continuous monitoring to really enhance safety here. The better.
I support Commissioner Goman's request to maybe add some language to the order along those lines, which seem very consistent with your recommendations anyway, and think that can be an ABC decision, granting the petition in part consistent with Commissioner Goman's comments and your recommendation. So, Commissioner Plant, anything else on this one?
Nope.
Ms. McLaughlin, does that get you what you need?
It does. I'll prepare an ABC order given the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Plant. I think that concludes our agenda. Any final thoughts before we adjourn?
No, I don't. Thanks.
Commissioner Goman?
Nothing additional, thanks.
Thanks to both of you. Thanks to the team. With that, we're adjourned, and sorry for my internet difficulties. Catch everyone next time. Thanks.